A few months ago, we took on the challenge of completing every single Halo game without driving to see which games could allow you to get further without using a vehicle. And while we were pretty happy with how well we did, we were even more impressed when some members of the community would come up with new ways to possibly beat levels. However, out of all of the runs that we did and all the levels we played, there was one level in particular that really bothered me. That level was Halo 3 ODST's Kikowani Station. So what is the Kikowani Station problem? Let's take a look back. When we got to Kikowani Station in Halo 3 ODST, we knew it would be difficult enough if we were going to navigate any part of this level at all without utilizing a Banshee. However, Luke and I did figure that we could use the Banshee that is existent on this map using our 1 second vehicle rule, meaning that you can go in a vehicle as long as you immediately jump out within 1 second, and use plasma batteries to launch ourselves up on top of the Phantom to ride ahead in the level, and we could move forward as long as one person was able to drop down and trigger the level moving forward. However, we ran into this massive problem when we reached this area that had a Wraith. We couldn't find a pathway to cause the Phantom to move up no matter what we tried. And honestly, we just kind of gave up here. We couldn't figure anything out, and it already had taken us hours to get as far as we did. But it really stuck with me because I felt like somehow, some way there had to be a way to move forward, and I just wasn't thinking about it. And sure, even if we could get past the Wraith, there would be other problems ahead, but I didn't want to completely shelve Kikowani Station, so I kept it in the back of my head even after the video went out. It wasn't until after New Year's, while working on some achievements, I met a group of players through a LFG post, and one of these players was actually willing to help me explore Kikowani Station when I casually brought it up in conversation. This guy was really knowledgeable in all things Halo, and maybe we could work together and come up with a new strategy with a fresh look at this level. He actually mentioned that there's some beam rifles at the very beginning of the level, which possibly could be useful to take out the Wraith, which may cause the Phantom to move up automatically. We jumped into Kikowani Station and devised a plan for what we would need if we were going to try to get a beam rifle that far, and if it could even potentially take out the Wraith. And we even spent a ton of time looking into what loaded in and out of the level and how load sequences across this level even worked. We actually theoretically came up with a strategy that may be possible to pull off. It would be a long shot, but at least there was the possibility, so it was reason enough for me to be willing to open up this case one more time on our channel and see if we can maybe get just a little bit closer to completing Kikowani Station without flying a Banshee. So let's look at what we know so far about this level. First things first, we're gonna have to do the Banshee launch once again, where we use the 1 second rule and a plasma battery to launch the Banshee up high enough so that I can jump out and land on the Phantom. If we're gonna bring the beam rifle all the way along to the Wraith room, it means that I'm gonna have to carry it from the very beginning and make sure I do not ever die or fall off and lose the gun or use any unnecessary ammo along the way. I'll also take a carbine with me just to have another ranged Covenant weapon. On the other hand, we're gonna need a couple other players also to do all of the tricks that Luke and I did together when we were doing this level before, but this time I'll have to stand off from doing them and they'll have to complete them on their own, so I can always stay up on the Phantom and hold on to the guns. There are several really challenging doors throughout this level that we will have to worry about, where we have to play Tetris with the door frames, and then there's also a section where we have to drop down and we used grenades to counter the gravity and hopefully prevent a falling to death sequence. And that's what we know is possible up until the Wraith room. So we're gonna have to do all of that again. Now, when looking at the Wraith room, which is the major point of contention in this challenge, we have to deal with the fact that the Phantom floating around won't want to move any forward, and the only potential ways we can maybe get past the Wraith is either if we fly ahead, as in using a Banshee, which we can't use, so maybe some sort of launch, or we can potentially take out the Wraith, which will trigger the Phantom to move up. The latter is what we're going to go after. Going off of what we know, we're going to have to put a plan together, and this is where it gets really interesting. We're going to not only have to get past the Wraith area, but also after that, there's a Scarab room, which we didn't even get to last time, and there's some huge gaps to clear there too, and there's a lot of weird mechanics involving how the Phantom moves up in that room that we had to look into also. But honestly, none of that even matters if we can't even get past the Wraith room to begin with. And for this challenge, I actually teamed up with 3 of my other friends. Sorry, Luke, we're going in without you. Honestly, he was away doing something that night, probably slaving away editing or playing Destiny on his computer with his PC friends. While I always get stuck in a 20-hour loading screen whenever I try to boot up Destiny 2 on my Xbox. So instead, I had to form a new squad. Our team consisted of me, Rocket Elijah, and I would be the Banshee launcher and the beam rifle holder. We had Dim Entree, the guy I met in the LFG post weeks back who helped me make this plan. He would be taking lead of the running team down below, showing others how to move the spawns and loading sequences and making any jumps that are necessary. Next we had Prism, a greenhorn to Halo, but he was dedicated to the completion of this run. And finally, to top our team off, we had Tails, who was supposed to be on the Phantom flying backup in case I fell off, but somehow he accidentally bought ODST for the Xbox 360 instead of the Master Chief Collection, so majority of this run was actually without him. Damn it, Tails. Well, we have to beat this whole level without using a Banshee, so maybe with just 3 players, we can have more options than what just Luke and I did, and then maybe one day Tails will join up and help us out too. And with all of that, we loaded in and started up our run. So of course, first up, my main thing I had to focus on is remembering to grab the beam rifle and the carbine, because without that, this whole thing would be for nothing. We had to push up to the Phantom relatively quickly and make sure not to kill all of the enemies, because Mickey will quickly jump into the Phantom and start flying around before we can even launch ourselves on. We definitely had to jump into doing the Banshee launch once again, where we push plasma batteries up to the Banshee. We had Dim throw a grenade and time it a little bit better than if you have to throw it yourself, which is really helpful here. And after just a few tries, we were able to land up on top of the Phantom. From there, the 2 other players have to quickly kill the rest of the enemies, so Mickey will jump up into the Phantom, and then they have to kill themselves to trigger a quick respawn. And mind you, respawns on this level are very tricky to manipulate, especially if you're riding on a Phantom. It just really doesn't want to give you respawns a lot of the time. From there, we fly over to the next section of this opening room, and Dim and Prism had to move quickly to take out all of the enemies around and drop down to open up the next door, triggering the next sequence, because if they didn't move quick enough, it would actually brick the Phantom, and the Phantom would not want to move anymore. Then we enter the first hallway, which is this game of human Tetris, which essentially meant I had to be perfectly lined up to fit through these tiny openings in the door. Now, while this was still tricky and a really annoying challenge throughout, this is just a taste of the much harder version we have to deal with later on in this level. However, if we can ride through this section carefully enough, we can take out the squid houses that are down below, causing the Phantom to move up even more. And honestly, this Phantom just drives around like none other. It's almost like you're riding on a mechanical wonky bull or something, because Mickey is just the worst driver ever. From here, we got to the grenade drop part that we had gotten to before with Luke, and essentially last time we had to bounce grenades up to break the fall of the dropping player. However, after some trial and error, both Dim and Prism were able to make the landing by turning sideways, so the position of the player will slide off the railing rather than have a hard impact. And if we tried it enough times and the RNG gods were in our favor, we could actually occasionally land without dying. So this actually saved us a lot of trouble instead of having to try a grenade tactic. But we were making a lot of progress, but now it was time for us to enter the Wraith room. So at this point, we had moved up relatively well, doing the respawns inside the tunnels so we could all get up on the Phantom at the same time, because any extra firepower could help at taking out other enemies around. Unfortunately, Dim didn't catch the respawn fast enough, so it was just Prism and I up on top of the Phantom to try to take out the Wraith. And honestly, facing off against the Wraith was definitely exciting, but also really nerve-wracking. We put a lot of time into planning this challenge out again to revisit it, and honestly, if we couldn't really pull it off in an actual run, it would all be for nothing. And this is literally a section that we had failed at in the past, so the stakes were really high here. Fortunately, I was the one with the beam rifle, and I had to really try to figure out how to pace the shots out, because essentially the only way I'm likely going to be able to take out this Wraith is if I can somehow hit a pinpoint headshot on the driver of the Wraith, not the guy in the turret, the actual guy inside of the hatch. So my main strategy was actually to use the carbine at first, trying to do as much damage to the Wraith as possible, as it seemed like this gun also had just barely enough range to actually hit the Wraith. Meanwhile, Prism would be shooting at all of the other enemies around so that the Phantom itself would not be distracted by the other enemies and shoot at the Wraith. Now, we know the Phantom cannot actually take out the Wraith on its own, however, it can do a little bit of damage to help break up the Wraith, which means taking the hatch off can be a little bit easier. After using a lot of ammo, I was able to use my beam rifle a lot of times to knock off the hatch, and just barely you can see the tip-top part of the brute driver's head, which is essentially what I aimed for. I really waited for the crosshairs in ODST to have a red dot in the middle, meaning that maybe I was actually pointed at an enemy. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but that's what I thought it meant. And sure enough, after multiple tries and us spending a lot of time trying to see if we could shoot the driver in the Wraith, we were able to pull it off one time, which instantly destroys the Wraith and moves the Phantom up for once we finally progressed further. Honestly, it was really awesome when we finally took that Wraith out and we had this little mini celebration, but then we kind of realized what we were going to be up against next. We had to go through one more hallway and then we would be facing off against the Scarab in completely uncharted territory. We had absolutely no idea what we were getting ourselves into. And from the time we reached this section to the time we finally stopped playing Halo, it took us 6.5 hours of trying different things. So let's take a look at this Scarab room, which was beyond anything we had ever seen in any Halo challenge. So first of all, the Phantom, which I am still on, which we're assuming we're going to need if we're going to make our way over to the Scarab area, moves faster than any other section yet. And for some reason, Mickey seems so eager to go ahead into the hallway, he actually scratches the entire top of the Phantom up against the door, which means fitting through the Tetris walls in these next two doors are the hardest ones out of any other type of Tetris door that we had ever seen. The first door, I was able to memorize where I should stand a little bit quicker because I was constantly doing it, but by the time we got over to the second door, it was really complicated to line up where I was supposed to stand to fit through the door because of the way that Mickey drives. He turns rapidly and then cuts diagonally, so while it might look like you're lined up perfectly for the door, you might not always anticipate the quick diagonal rotation, which will completely throw you off and slam you against the wall. And there's just such a small window that you can actually fit through at that speed and not any real time to adjust. We spent so much time just having me learn where to stand and just trial and error over and over and over again. And even then, I only made it through a handful of times. And after making it through, the checkpoint still doesn't update. So if we're gonna beat the Scarab, from the time we're essentially going through the doors all the way to getting past the Scarab has to be done in one single checkpoint. And just because we're utilizing the Phantom to move across, it's not even something we could segment if we wanted to, because we really don't have any opportunities to pick our own checkpoints and recreate any progress that we were making here. However, during the few times that I did manage to make it through the doors, and then right afterwards Mickey starts driving at almost 90-degree angles, but if after all of that I could just manage to stay on long enough, the Phantom settles down in a corner, and then it goes to the running team, who has to find a way to trigger the Phantom to move up. What we came up with was a little bit out there and different, but it actually worked for triggering the Phantom, which gave us a lot of hope. So the main idea here is Dim would move up and jump on the railing by one of the Banshees and make a really big leap down to the lower platform. Prism would follow, and then they would make their way over to the railing by the water. Now, we tried just jumping over and seeing if the distance jumping off the railing would be enough forward movement for the game to register that players are on the other side of this open area and move the Phantom up. However, it is just short enough where we couldn't do it. So instead, what we found out is that if Prism sacrificed himself by jumping on top of Dim's head while standing on the railing, and hopefully the Scarab doesn't just completely blast them, because that happened so many times, Prism could get enough forward movement to trigger the game into thinking we're over on the other side, and the Phantom would then move up. From there, it comes back to my responsibility to somehow, despite the Phantom moving rapidly fast and then hitting the brake extremely quickly, causing me to constantly fly off the edges in many different ways. But if I could manage to stay on long enough, maybe it would be possible for me to drop down to the lower level. We tried it a couple times, but honestly, the fact that the setup just to get this far bar to even try to land was close to impossible. We were not getting anywhere. And at this point in our run, hours into it, we just couldn't figure out what to try next. And then, to put even more icing on the cake, Prism actually lagged out of the game and ended up not being able to play for the rest of the night. Fortunately for us though, Tails' game managed to finish downloading. So Tails jumped in to be the replacement to Prism, but we still only had 3 players, and since there isn't a checkpoint system that lets you just jump back in where you were without using a rally point, which we felt would have been kind of weird to do, we did do a quick segment section where we started back at the beginning. I went ahead and grabbed the carbine and the beam rifle and depleted all of my ammo just to show that we're not using this for any type of extra advantage, and we used the Banshees just to fly back to the same checkpoint that we were at. Actually, I accidentally shot too much of my ammo, but whatever. Not that we even have to explain this part, but just in case some of you are wondering why it looks a little different or how we did it that way, now you guys know. So the only other improvement though we were able to even make was we actually came to the realization that in the lower section when we're in the hallway area, there is a brute chieftain with a hammer, and Dim could actually take that hammer and go down to the railing section where he typically would have Prism sacrifice himself to the water, and he could sacrifice himself with the gravity hammer and give himself enough distance. This actually meant that we could potentially have 2 people up on the Phantom, Tails and I, and we could both have 2 shots at trying to make it through the Tetris doors, which hopefully could up the frequency of us being able to at least try to make that final jump for the Scarab. We could just get down to the Scarab, we could maybe beat this level. However, we tried forever trying to make this strategy work as well, and theoretically it did look like maybe it could be possible. We called it quits for the night and we regrouped the next day with Prism coming back and Dim being online, but Tails wasn't there because he was off downloading another ODST or something, and we tried it even more. I even memorized the exact pixel I needed to stand on the Phantom to line myself up with both doors. So things were getting better in the regards to the fact that I was able to make it more often. However, even with me making it more often through all of the doors, I couldn't seem to stay on the Phantom long enough to find a low section to land on without being killed from fall damage. And even if I thought I was kind of in a good spot to jump from, with the Phantom constantly moving, it's almost impossible to control your ODST and steer so you fall at the right time and not die to fall damage once again. And honestly, that's kind of where this challenge stood. It's something that we're positive is possible to be done, but we just couldn't pull off the execution. And after all of that work, we were happy to at least progress further than we were able to the first time, and we think that coming up with a theory and a strategy that could possibly work is still an accomplishment in itself, but there was just no way we could logistically pull this off. So honestly, it was a wrap. We got further, it was probably time to move on to other challenges and maybe come back to Kikowani Station one day, but deep down we knew the actual possibility of this level would in fact remain a mystery. That was until we came up with a new idea. After hours and hours of different strategies, we wondered what could happen if we went back to the rudimentary tricks that we've been thinking about and utilizing in our planning stage this whole time. What if we really took a look at the next area differently and tried using a different set of tools? Down in the next area, we knew about the brute that had the gravity hammer. And of course, we were passing right by a bunch of Banshees that are there for players to utilize to replace their old ones if needed. Maybe we needed to go back to the very first trick we discovered when we started this entire thing and see if we could come up with some way to get it a little bit further in a different way than what we had been trying. We also noticed there were plasma batteries around also, just like we did in the first section. So we tried out a ton of different types of movements using the Banshees again to see if we could do some sort of launch in the 1 second window we're allowed to enter and exit a Banshee. We actually found out that the gravity hammer is more effective in launching as we don't have to push the plasma batteries around, and while we would be limited to only 3 hits to a Banshee before it would explode, it could be enough possibly to get the Banshee and a player far enough along to get to the Scarab. So after testing out all of this stuff, it was time to see if we could maybe launch ourselves a little further along. And we found that Dim could not only launch the Banshee, if lucky, correctly down to the lower platform he had been dropping down to a bunch using the gravity hammer, or he could even jump into the Banshee for one quick second, jump out, and then while the Banshee is airborne still, he was even able to quickly jump in one last time and get another forward push out of the Banshee, giving it just slightly enough momentum to have it drop down to the lower section. Either of these strategies would work for this challenge, as at least it got the Banshee in a new area. From there, I would follow in suit and do the 1 second trick in the Banshee one more time, where Dim would hit me with the gravity hammer. Now mind you, we struggled so much here with all of these Scarab shots coming at us and blowing our Banshee off of the platform when trying this, and this was a perfect opportunity for Prism, who was back in our game, to stand over in a different section and draw the fire from the Scarab and be a distraction, giving us just enough time to pull off the next series of launches. Dim would then launch me in the Banshee across the middle platform, and we would actually land it still in the main platform, and we had to be careful not to overshoot it, but we were able to line it up a couple of times where we were kind of in sight of the last little island section before the Scarab. We had about one final hit left that we could do before the Banshee would explode at this point, and this still took many tries of launching multiple times throughout this middle pathway technique we were trying. But sure enough, after a lot of setting up and restarting to where we last were and what progress we had made, we were able to pull off a launch that would put me up on the middle island that I've been trying to land on for hours through the Phantom. From there, I was able to actually just walk along the platform and run underneath the legs of the Scarab. Now in this level, you actually don't have to take out the Scarab to beat it. It's a misconception of this level, but if you go straight to the door, you can bypass the entire Scarab part and enter the last hallway section. So that's what I did. There's no need to fight the Scarab here at all, even though we had planned for that if we had to take it out, where we would have just had Dim grab a Covenant turret and shoot the legs off of the Scarab, and I would have boarded it through there, but we didn't have to do any of that. So instead, Dim and Prism just oofed themselves and respawned on me, and we made a final sprint down the hallway where we see this big area with all the squid houses. From there, all we had to do was shoot at the squid house. It triggered the chain reaction, and we beat Kikowani Station without flying a Banshee. That was incredible. This was easily the hardest challenge we ever have done, and mostly the biggest challenge was the fact that we never knew for sure if it was possible. Like when we do other challenges like the no walking things or the no jumping, we usually have a pretty good idea that it is possible, or if it's not possible, we can still continue on with the video and make it a tally video where we count how many jumps are required. But for something like this, it's pass or fail. We can't feel like we completed something unless we really do complete something. And we finally pulled it off, and though it took hours upon hours, we were really proud of the accomplishment. And you know what? I highly recommend you guys try this challenge for yourself. Get a group of friends on ODST. Call it the Rocket Sloth Kikowani Station Challenge. I don't know. But if you guys actually pull this challenge off as well on any difficulty and you send it to us in a video, I will definitely personally watch the video because this was such a crazy feat. But hey, after all of that, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe with the notifications on for more videos just like this one, and you won't miss anything we upload, even if YouTube's acting all whack. Also, if you want to, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at Rocket Elijah, or you can follow Luke at Rocket Sloth Luke. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time with a brand new video. Bye guys.